Mr. President?
Can I live?
You do you.
YOLO, man.
President Obama making a BuzzFeed video to promote healthcare.gov. Time being what it is, while the president was YOLOing with a selfie stick, we were also getting the news that sadly Kayla Mueller had been killed. However that came down, ISIS confirming that. We know that U.S. forces in Afghanistan are stepping up nighttime raids on militants, and fighting rages ahead of the Ukrainian ceasefire. We understand that the president, like anybody, has a right to have fun, but does that YOLOing diminish the whole notion of the presidency? Let's talk about it with our political panel. Joining me now, a dear friend from out in the stomping grounds I used to inhabit in Arizona, the host of the Rusty Humphries Rebellion, radio show host Rusty Humphries, and from Newsmax, New York, the senior political contributor for Forbes.com, despite some political differences, a good friend too, Rick Ungar. So Rick, president's got a right. I mean, everybody, Dwight Eisenhower said, take your job, but never yourself seriously. But Obama isn't Ike.
Well, no, he's not Ike. He's also not anybody else but Obama. Look, I think that when we see presidents showing this side of their personality, and it doesn't matter if they're a Democrat or Republican, personally, I love it. I love to see presidents showing sense of humor and humanity. He did this video for BuzzFeed, a much younger audience. I thought it was great, but I got to be honest with you. When people on my side were criticizing President George W. Bush for dancing at that African event, I thought he was great. I didn't criticize him at all. I like to see the side of presidents.
Maybe it's not so much the humanity of presidents, Rusty, it's the timing involved, whether it was this YOLOing thing or the president going out to play golf after news of the first execution of an American hostage. The president may embrace the younger demographic, but the timing of some of these things is disturbing.
Well, listen, JD, I'm a guy who has a sense of humor. I appreciate a guy with a sense of humor. The problem is that Obama has lowered the standard of president of the United States. This is a guy that I don't want to see a comic in chief. I don't want to see a rapper in chief. I want to see a commander in chief, especially during this time of crisis around the world where the world is literally on fire.
Well, mindful of that, the situation as it has developed internationally, Rick, last week we heard from Susan Rice that this administration's strategy was strategic patience. This week, of course, we saw the evacuation of the embassy in Yemen. Is that strategic patience?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm probably the wrong guy to be talking to about this because I've been somewhat critical of the strategy in dealing with ISIL and some other foreign situations. I do think this, though, if people want to be realistic as opposed to picking their side and taking shots, I think that the strategy the president had at the outset was a strategy. The whole let's deplete them and then destroy them. The problem is despite how rosy he made it sound the other day, and despite how bad the other side makes it sound, the strategy is not working. We've seen ISIL members go from what we believe were 20,000 to now there are some credible estimates of 200,000. That means we're not depleting them. We've probably got to go a different direction. Rather than scream and shout at each other, let's acknowledge that and let's look for a better strategy.
Well, one way to look for a better strategy, Rusty, is to look at one of our allies, the King of Jordan. He's been dubbed the Warrior King, and he has not hesitated a nanosecond. Could our commander-in-chief take lessons from him?
Well, of course, and Rick was right. We should be doing something. I appreciate Rick being a guy with intellectual integrity and a guy that says, okay, when the president's wrong, he's wrong. The problem is the president doesn't think he's wrong, and most of the Democrat Party doesn't think that he's wrong. When you have Debbie Wasserman Schultz complaining that Benjamin Netanyahu is going to come and speak to Congress during this time of, again, crisis around the world, we have a problem of politics President Obama has allowed politics to get in the way of good sense and good judgment, or maybe he just doesn't have any good sense or judgment at all.
Of course.
I don't entirely agree with that, Rusty.
Well, that's why we're going to
I'm not a
continue. That's why
All right.
the one thing we have to agree on here is the time. Unfortunately, it is a four-letter word. We've got to step aside for a second, but this passionate discussion with pronouncements and observations from our political panel will continue right here on America's Forum.
But the fact, she's 81 years old and yet she's so in touch with what's happening, right? I mean, who's powering the future right now? It's young people. And if you look at the numbers, 71% of millennials are for gay marriage. We know that love doesn't belong to one religion or to one party. It belongs to everyone.
A discussion from MSNBC. The panelists responding to Madam Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, saying the United States would accept a ruling from the Supreme Court in support of gay marriage. Was the justice tipping her hand on an upcoming Supreme Court ruling? That will provide the fodder now for our political panel as we continue our conversation with Rusty Humphries, host of Rusty Humphries Rebellion, and Rick Ungar, who you see nightly here on the Daily Wrap on Newsmax TV. So, Rick, you're a lawyer. We don't hold it against you. But aren't Supreme Court justices...
That. I'm reformed.
Well, and I'm a recovering member of Congress, but in terms of those serving now in the judiciary, especially on the Supreme Court, aren't they supposed to be quiet on pronouncements of cases that are going to come before them?
Well, actually, yes and no. I mean, we've seen Supreme Court justices over the years from all different spectrum of ideology talk about their feelings about certain things. If you listen to what Ginsburg said, yeah, she tipped her hand, but did you think for 1 second that she was going to be voting any way different? Also keep in mind that they were called upon to make a ruling last week in this Alabama situation. So she was actually referring more to that. But yeah, we know how Ginsburg's going to vote. Come on.
Rusty, the Constitution says justices remain for good behavior. We've morphed that into a lifetime appointment. Obviously, Justice Ginsburg has had some health problems. Is it time for term limits for justices on the Supreme Court?
You would think they would have the common sense to say, okay, I'm, almost 100. Maybe I should step down. But for some reason, the ego and the power that comes along with offices like this never allows these judges to see what's in the best interest of the country. It's just in what's in the best interest for them.
Well, I'm going to defend Justice Ginsburg. I've actually spoken with her. Her mind is as sharp as any of us could ever hope to be. She does have some health issues. A lot of Democrats wish she would resign so that this president can pick the next Supreme Court justice as opposed to maybe a Republican in 2 years. But there's nothing wrong with her ability to function mentally. I can tell you that.
It's not just Ginsburg. All of them do this. I mean, this is something that has happened quite often, and they should step down when they are in a position of ailing health. Again, it's okay for the next generation to be able to have to have jobs. We're doing everything that for the next generation to get employment.
Well,
I take the point, Rusty, I do. But you know what happens is different sides begin to have different measuring sticks for, is Justice Scalia still fully there? He gets a little crazy sometimes. So depending on where
that guy's off. That guy's awesome. He can stay there as long as he wants. But
see, that's my point.
But you were throwing out that whole crazy thing, Rick, about where the justice stands on the issues. He's sound.
No. I got to tell you. JD, I rarely have agreed with Justice Scalia, but I have enormous respect for him. I've always said he has one of the greatest minds the court's ever seen. But he is getting a little kind of weird lately. I got to say it. So
how about this?
That's
how
the
about
problem.
we do
that's
a cutoff? Okay, how about this? If retirement age for all of us is 65 or 62 and a half, how about for justices it's 80 or 75?
Well, propose the constitutional amendment. I probably go with you on that, but it would take an amendment to the Constitution.
Well, the real thing we need to see, and it's not so much a constitutional amendment, but if there are term limits on the executive branch, we should have term limits on the legislative, the judiciary, and the bureaucracy. because that's where the real problem comes. But of course, with the power of the bureaucratic unions now in Washington, that probably is not going to happen in the not too distant future. Rick Ungar, as always, we appreciate your thoughtful, if at
Always
times left-leaning perception of things. We'll be
He's
looking.
okay.
He's an okay guy. We'll see you tonight, Rick, with Joe Conch on the Daily Wrap. Rusty
Thanks,
Humphries,
man.
we're going to
Appreciate it.
have you stay with us to pull in some co-hosting duties, and we will be back with more on America's Forum right after this.